Grand Junction, Colorado, June 2007. To her friends, her family, and especially her 3 young children, 34-year-old Paige Birgfeld was the portrait of a devoted single mother. Bright, entrepreneurial, and fiercely loving. She worked multiple jobs selling kitchen products, teaching dance to build a stable life for her family after her second divorce. But Paige guarded a profound secret, one that would remain hidden until after she vanished. To support her family, she had ventured into a dangerous world, operating an escort service under the name Unraveled Inc. This double life created a chasm between the public, Paige, and the private one, a chasm that would plunge investigators into shadows and complicate every step of the search for the truth. June 28, 2007. Paige spent a seemingly normal afternoon on a picnic with her first ex-husband. She returned home and then left again. It was the last time her family would ever see her. That night, her 8-year-old daughter made a heartbreaking call to report her mother missing. The disappearance was immediate, total, and baffling. The search for Paige Birgfeld began that night. But it would take nearly 5 years for her remains to be found, and almost a decade for a courtroom to deliver justice. Her case would become one of Colorado's most puzzling cold cases, a story of a hidden life, a relentless investigation, and a killer who believed he had left no trace. 3 days after she vanished, a clue emerged that confirmed everyone's deepest fears. Paige's red Ford Focus was discovered, but not as she left it. It had been torched, reduced to a blackened shell in a parking lot, and around it, scattered like grotesque confetti, were her personal checks and business cards. This wasn't a disappearance. This was a crime scene, and the hunt for a killer had just begun. The discovery of Paige Birgfeld's burned-out car on July 1, 2007, transformed the case from a missing persons investigation into a full-blown homicide. Arson investigators determined the fire was deliberately set an attempt to destroy evidence. But the perpetrator made a critical mistake. Scattered around the vehicle were Paige's personal items. These weren't dropped by accident. They were deliberately planted or discarded. To investigators, this signaled a message, a taunt, or a clumsy attempt to point the investigation toward her secret life as an escort. It confirmed her involvement in a high-risk world, instantly broadening the suspect pool to include disgruntled clients, jealous partners, or dangerous strangers. The initial suspect list was long. Her ex-husbands were interviewed and cleared. The investigation delved into the shadowy client list of Unraveled Inc. But without a body, without a clear crime scene, and with a victim leading a clandestine life, traditional leads evaporated quickly. The case grew cold, frustratingly stagnant, as months turned into years. For Paige's family, the pain of not knowing was a perpetual agony. For the Grand Junction and Delta County law enforcement, it was an open wound. They had a burned car, a scattered trail of clues, and a victim who had seemingly vanished from the face of the earth. The case file remained open, but the trail was ice cold. But cold cases have a way of waiting. Technology advances. New eyes review old evidence. And sometimes, the earth itself gives up its secrets. Nearly 5 years after Paige Birgfeld walked out of her life, a hiker in a remote Colorado gulch would stumble upon a discovery that would crack the case wide open, forcing investigators to confront a scene of unimaginable horror and finally, providing the physical evidence they so desperately needed. March 6, 2012, nearly 5 years after, Paige Birgfeld vanished. A hiker in the isolated Wells Gulch, about 30 miles southeast of Grand Junction, discovered something unnerving: human skeletal remains, partially exposed in a dry creek bed. The remote location was a classic disposal site, a place where someone hoped nature would erase their crime forever. Delta County investigators secured the scene. The remains were carefully recovered and sent for analysis. Despite the years and the exposure, one piece of evidence was immediately telling. Duct tape was found wrapped around the skull and jaw. This was not an accident or a natural death. This was a binding, a restraint. This was a homicide. Dental records provided the definitive, heartbreaking identification. The remains were those of Paige Birgfeld. Her family's long nightmare of not knowing was over, replaced by the crushing certainty of her murder. For investigators, the discovery was a tragic but crucial turning point. They now had a primary crime scene, or at least a disposal site, and the physical evidence that had been missing for years. Not the condition of the remains, and the exact cause of death could not be determined. But the duct tape spoke volumes. It suggested kidnapping, captivity, and a violent end. The remote location suggested a perpetrator familiar with the area, someone who wanted Paige to disappear without a trace. The cold case was now violently, undeniably hot again. With a body and a concrete piece of evidence, investigators could now revisit old suspects with new focus. One name, which had floated in the periphery of the case for years, began to rise to the top. A man with a violent past, whose phone had contacted Paige's escort service. A man who had initially denied knowing her. The digital ghost from 2007 was about to become the prime suspect in 2012. His name was Lester Ralph Jones. The discovery of Paige's remains armed investigators with a grim new certainty. They returned to the mountain of data collected in 2007 with fresh eyes, searching for a link between the digital footprint and the desolate gulch. One thread began to pull tighter than all others. The cell phone records of a man named Lester Ralph Jones. Jones was not a stranger to law enforcement. His record included violent crimes, notably a prior conviction for kidnapping his ex-wife. He was a man with a demonstrated capacity for control and violence against women. Crucially, phone records showed he had contacted Paige Birgfeld's escort service, Models Inc., in the time frame leading up to her disappearance. When first questioned in 2007, Jones denied knowing Paige, but his digital trail told a different story. Investigators also discovered he had purchased and used a prepaid burner phone around the time of her disappearance, a classic tool for someone seeking anonymity. The coincidence was glaring. Jones had the motive of a client meeting gone wrong, the opportunity through contact, and the demonstrated propensity for violence. Convinced of his involvement, but lacking the physical evidence to make an arrest, investigators employed a sophisticated tactic. They obtained a court order to secretly place a GPS tracking device on Jones's vehicle. They hoped he might lead them to a weapon, return to the disposal site, or otherwise betray himself. For a time, he was under constant, silent surveillance. The GPS surveillance was a high-stakes gamble. It yielded no immediate smoking gun, but it underscored the intense focus on Lester Jones. He was their man. But the case against him was purely circumstantial phone records, a violent history, and opportunity. They needed more. The investigation settled into a tense stalemate, with detectives waiting for Jones to make a mistake, or for a new piece of evidence to emerge from the shadows of the past. The wait would last 2 more long years. The years following the discovery of Paige's remains were a period of meticulous, patient work. The focus was firmly on Lester Jones, but the puzzle pieces, the burner phone, the cell records, the GPS data, the duct tape, were all circumstantial. They formed a compelling picture of guilt, but not an irrefutable one. The district attorney's office needed a case strong enough to charge murder. Investigators recanvassed old leads. They dove deeper into Jones's background, searching for any pattern that matched the method of Paige's kidnapping and killing. The duct tape evidence was crucial. It showed planning and intent. They worked to build a timeline so tight, so logically coherent, that even without an eyewitness or a murder weapon, A jury could see only one possible conclusion. The theory was clear. Jones, using his status as a client, lured Paige into a meeting. He then kidnapped her, using the duct tape found on her remains. He killed her, burned her car to destroy forensic evidence, and dumped her body in the remote gulch. It was a classic sequence of a predatory, organized crime. Proving it in court was the final, formidable challenge. Finally, in November 2014, 7 years after, Paige's disappearance, investigators and prosecutors felt they had built the strongest case possible with the evidence available. An arrest warrant was issued. Lester Ralph Jones was taken into custody at his home, charged with first-degree murder, kidnapping, and arson. The long wait was over. The trial was about to begin. But taking a case to trial and winning a conviction are two different battles. The evidence was circumstantial. There was no confession, no murder weapon, no direct forensic link like DNA from the remains. The defense would argue reasonable doubt at every turn. The state's first attempt to convict Lester Jones would push a jury to its limit and end in a shocking courtroom stalemate. September 2016, nearly a decade after the crime, Lester Jones's first trial began. The prosecution presented their circumstantial mosaic, the phone records linking Jones to Paige, the history of violence, the damning duct tape, the burned car, and the remote disposal site. They argued it formed an unbroken chain leading directly to the defendant. The defense's strategy was singular and powerful: attack the lack of direct evidence. No witness placed Jones with Paige that night. No DNA from the remains tied to him. The duct tape had no fingerprints. They argued the prosecution's case was built on coincidence and speculation, not proof beyond a reasonable doubt. For days, the jury heard this battle between a compelling narrative of guilt and the cold, hard standard of reasonable doubt. They deliberated and deliberated. The tension stretched to a breaking point. Finally, they returned to the courtroom, but not with a verdict. Judge announced, "The court has been informed the jury is hopelessly deadlocked. I hereby declare a mistrial." A hung jury. For Paige Birgfeld's family, it was a devastating setback. After 9 years of waiting, they were forced to endure the entire painful process again. For the state, it was a clear message. Their circumstantial case was strong, but not strong enough to convince every juror. They had to go back, refine their presentation, and try again. The prosecution did not retreat. They regrouped. They analyzed what worked and what didn't in the first trial. Within months, they were ready to face Lester Jones in court a second time. The evidence was the same, but the strategy was sharper. This was their final chance to secure justice for Paige Birgfeld. The outcome would depend on 12 new citizens and their ability to see the truth hidden within a web of circumstances. December 2016. Just 3 months after the mistrial, a second jury was seated. The evidence against Lester Jones hadn't changed, but the prosecution's presentation had. They streamlined their case, focusing with laser precision on the logic of the circumstantial web, the motive of a client meeting, the opportunity proven by phone records, the means evidenced by his violent history and the duct tape, and the consciousness of guilt shown by burning the car and hiding the body. Prosecutor said, "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you don't need to have seen the crime to know who committed it. The facts, when woven together, leave only one reasonable conclusion. The defendant left a trail not of fingerprints, but of decisions. The decision to call her. The decision to use a burner phone. The decision to bind her. The decision to hide her." The defense mounted the same argument, reasonable doubt. They again highlighted the lack of direct forensic evidence. But this time, the prosecution's narrative was tighter, more compelling. They framed the lack of DNA not as a weakness, but as proof of the defendant's cunning, a man with a history of kidnapping, who knew how to cover his tracks. After hearing closing arguments, the second jury retired to deliberate. The question was no longer just about guilt or innocence. It was about whether the state's interpretation of the facts was the only reasonable one. For Paige Birgfeld's family, waiting through a second deliberation was an almost unbearable torment. Would this end in another deadlock? Or would they finally get the verdict that had eluded them for nearly a decade? The wait was over. The jury had reached a verdict. After nearly 10 years of mystery, 5 years without a body, 2 trials, and countless sleepless nights for a grieving family, the moment of truth had arrived. Court clerk announced, "On the count of first-degree murder, we the jury find the defendant, Lester Ralph Jones, guilty." The verdicts continued: guilty of second-degree kidnapping, guilty of arson, guilty on all charges. The circumstantial case had held. The jury had seen the logical chain, the pattern of a predator, and had found it unbroken. Justice, delayed for almost a decade, had finally been served in that courtroom. Judge announced, "For the murder of Paige Birgfeld, this court sentences you to life in the custody of the Department of Corrections without the possibility of parole." Lester Ralph Jones was sentenced to die in prison. The additional 12-year sentence for kidnapping was a legal formality. His life was already over. He was removed from the courtroom, beginning his permanent journey into obscurity behind bars. For him, the story was finished. For Paige's loved ones, a crucial, painful chapter had closed. A killer was condemned, but many questions remained forever unanswered. The exact cause and manner of Paige's death died with Jones's silence. The full why of that June night was buried with her. The conviction brought legal accountability, but not true understanding. It brought an end to the court proceedings, but not to the legacy of a vibrant mother, daughter, and friend whose life was stolen in the shadows. With Lester Jones imprisoned for life, the legal saga reached its terminus. Yet the conviction, while resounding, left a haunting silence in its wake. The how and the why of Paige Birgfeld's final hours remained locked within the killer's mind. Details he would never share. The duct tape proved restraint, but the precise cause of death was lost to time and the elements. Investigators theorized a beating, but could not prove it. The motive was understood in broad strokes. A client meeting that turned violent, but the specific trigger, the moment everything spiraled, died with Paige. The case was solved, but the story was incomplete. For her family, justice was a bittersweet validation. It confirmed what they knew, that Paige was the victim of a monstrous crime. It ensured her killer would never harm anyone else. But it could not fill the void left by her absence. Nor could it erase the pain of learning about her secret life through the brutal lens of a murder investigation. Paige's legacy is thus a complex tapestry. She is remembered as a devoted mother who went to extraordinary, and ultimately fatal, lengths to provide for her children. Her story is a stark warning about the dangers lurking in hidden lives and a testament to the relentless, years-long pursuit of justice. Even when evidence is circumstantial and the trail grows cold, the murder of Paige Birgfeld is a closed case but an open wound. It reminds us that justice is sometimes more about the careful assembly of truth than about a single shocking revelation. As we conclude this story, we are left not with a dramatic confession, but with the enduring image of a life lost, a mystery partially solved, and a resolution that, while definitive, can never truly be complete. The story of Paige Birgfeld cannot be contained by a court verdict or a prison sentence. It is, at its heart, the story of a mother's love, a family's resilience, and a community's refusal to forget. While Lester Jones exists now as a footnote in a prison log, Paige is remembered for the light she brought into the world. Her greatest legacy walks this earth in her 3 children. Her memory endures in the hearts of those who love the vibrant, entrepreneurial woman. They knew a woman whose choices, both public and private, were driven by a fierce devotion to her family. This case stands as a monument to cold case investigation. It proves that justice does not have an expiration date, that patient detective work, evolving technology, and an unwavering commitment can weave a compelling truth from strands of circumstance, even years later. It is a victory for the investigators who never gave up, and for a family who never stopped seeking answers. We remember Paige Birgfeld not for the secret she kept or the horror of her death, but for the love she gave, the life she lived, and the justice that was finally, rightfully, delivered in her name. Her story is a solemn reminder of the hidden struggles many face, and the enduring power of truth. If this documentary resonated with you, please like and subscribe for more deep dives into impactful true crime. Your thoughts on the case are welcome in the comments.